Hey folks, it's Jeremy Kirkland. You're listening to Blama. How we doing? I'm very happy to be with you this week. Because we are in this thing, aren't we? Ooh, wowie zowie. I also love Pavement, if that just reminded you of Pavement, but here we are. I had one of those weeks, like many of you. Feels like I'm in a funk. I'm in this funk and I can't shake it off. I got sickness, I got cloudiness, just all the kinds of whatever it is, and I'm going through it. But life marches on. I'm trying to find some off-screen analog ways to chill out lately. That's been kind of fun. Reading a few different books. Of course, they're all about World War II. But what do you expect? I'm nearly 40. That just ends up what I'm reading. But last but not least, I'm building Lego with my kids, and now, yes, I'm also building Lego by myself. And I'm like, oh yeah, like this is awesome. I'm making Hogwarts stuff. I'm moving the little minifigs around, and nerdiness aside, or whatever you want to say, it's great. I would definitely encourage you to just find some nice little offline analog stuff, whether it's just sitting on a chair, listening to some tunes. I don't know, listen to a podcast. I don't know. Whatever it is that you're doing, just a little disconnect from a screen in front of your face. It's kind of nice. But I don't think I'd ever felt so chill and relaxed since I learned Paul Simon's American Tune on guitar. Great song, by the way. Okay, look. It's your boy. I'm always going to tell you the truth. And speaking of the truth, we got Alex Carleton on the pod this week. The Alex Carleton. And I will say this at the beginning, because when I first started this pod in 2016, I was like, man, you know how cool it would be to get Alex Carleton on? Well, fast forward nearly 9 years. Oof. But we got him, the man himself. Look, Alex has been in this industry for a long time. And he's always been a bit more behind the scenes, despite his job titles. But some of you might remember him from Rogues Gallery way back in the day, or LL Bean's Signature. But he's been at the legendary American brand Filson for, over 10 years now, where he currently serves as their chief creative officer. And as you'll hear, he's showing no signs of slowing down. So Alex and I discuss his origin and background, the menswear boom of the 2010s, the Filson archive, and why consistency matters. It's all in there. Let's get to it.
Did you go to Pitti in Florence?
Yeah, I did the whole gauntlet of
nice
of peacocks and craziness and carbonara. But
this is the first time I haven't gone in a few years, and it's kind of nice not to travel.
Yeah, It's Pitti is great. Like I think it's good to see the things that the best way don't change. Like this is we don't need to. A friend of mine does like trend reporting and stuff, and his trend report is that there's not a trend to report on, which I feel like is very interesting to But he was like, no, this is good. It means people are kind of continuing to refine, whatever buzzwords people are trying to use, in the sense that like it's not, now we need to make bigger oversized clothes, or now we need to make skinny clothes, and it's in a good way. And I feel like Pitti's a good barometer, because you'll have some of the Japanese folks that are out there, some French folks, I mean, people from everywhere, but it's a nice sort of fashion barometer of what isn't changing, which I think is kind of refreshing these days.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, but as we're recording this, I think the Louis Vuitton show is currently playing the Sephiroth theme from Final Fantasy VII. So who knows what sort of arcade is happening out in Paris. Buckle up.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, we were talking about traveling earlier. When you travel, as you're having to travel a lot for different stuff, do you set time aside for yourself to like go and do things? As I say this as a person who's like, I was just at Pitti. I'm near some of the most beautiful architecture that's ever existed. And I'm like, nope, I got to go look at some shirts. Like, how do you compartmentalize this stuff?
I mean, I try to, if I can, I will.
Yeah.
If I can take half a day and get out of the matrix, of clothing, then I will. And it's always enriching. And I think sometimes too, it's like the details, like where you sleep, where you eat.
Right.
If you're kind of going with the herd, or if you're trying to pop out of it a little bit and just kind of do your own thing. So, or, if you get there a day early, I'm a real baby when it comes to jet lag. So I always try to pad in some nap time.
Oh, smart.
I'm not one of those guys that can just like get off the plane and go to the meeting and feel great. So I try to pad a little bit of room before the meetings so that I'm refreshed and might be able to get a little slice of wherever I am and acclimate.
Yeah.
But it also depends where it is. And I definitely have, preferences. Taking an extra day in London is far more meaningful for me personally than an extra day somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends where we're going.
Yeah. I get that. I imagine some places they may not be as scenic in terms of other events.
Relevant for me personally, like going to the Imperial War Museum all day long,
Yeah.
or the Army Museum in Chelsea, or, there are things that we just, we're personally attracted to, or we become enriched by more so in some places than others. Yeah. But I do think, like wherever you go, there's something to glean. There's something of value. There's something to discover. Travel is incredible education. So,
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is one thing that always catches me off guard, especially in Florence, of all kind of Italian cities, is the love of, this is real talk here, of Filson, vintage Filson specifically, like going through. I was with some friends of mine, and we walked through a handful of the vintage shops there. And there's like, okay, you got some old Hermes stuff here, you got some Chanel stuff, and then just dozens upon dozens of like tin cloth and Mackinac and all of this like super classic Filson from like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And it's, I don't know, at least where I am, even in the Midwest, I don't see anything like that. Especially when it's like, this is museum quality stuff.
Yeah. It's also gotten more expensive.
Oh my God.
Like
1,500 euro tin cloth coat.
Totally. It's like, it's sort of a nice reflection of the value of the brand, right? Like the equity of the brand. Because I remember, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you could pick up Filson for, a lot less than you can today. And I think in recent years, it's really elevated in its value. The resale value.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Has become quite high. Well, and there are just, I have like collectors that will reach out to me on Instagram. They figure out that I work at Filson and they just have all these questions, right?
Okay.
Real fans, and will send me pictures of things and ask me, and about specific things, or ask me to help them find specific things. And we keep our old things here, but there are there's some good dealers out there that specialize in Filson that I try to connect them with. But
that's nice.
Yeah, there's like a rabid fan base that seems to be growing bit by bit.
Oh, definitely. I think especially with, I don't know, I feel like we're at this era too, and we'll talk a little bit about your backstory, but like, I feel like we're in this era of like, there's not really, like we were saying earlier, there's not really like trends or styles. And so you can, you'll have 4 or 5 different people that are dressed incredibly well, where you have one person wearing a bespoke suit. You have another person wearing, I don't know, like Carol Christian Pole, like super heavy designer stuff. And you have another guy wearing like vintage Filson or LL Bean, and it all fits and it's all fine. Yeah. And, and I've even found myself kind of mixing things up more and more. I have a super, super, super old Mackinac that, it took me about 4 or 5 years, I'll be honest, to get the previous owner's smell out.
Huh. Funny.
It was like, it had that real, like, oh, this is vintage. Yeah, because it smells vintage. And I wore that the other day, and it's perfect. And I feel like that doesn't, you don't really stick out like a sore thumb or something, into which it feels like when I was first getting into stuff. And even like Rogues Gallery era, it's like kind of everyone was wearing this type of, now people say like hashtag menswear or whatever, where there's just, Americana, you had the rugged boots, the rugged coats, the rugged denim. Yeah. And now it's like everything fits in the same.
It's a mosh pit.
Yeah. This nice little melting pot of style.
For sure. Here. That's probably because of communication, right?
Sure.
So it's Instagram, like everything now, right? So it didn't used to be like that pre-Instagram.
Yeah.
Where things were more compartmentalized and you had more regionality. Now it's like, everything is on the buffet.
Yeah.
So you see kids mixing Loewe with Filson with, I mean, just uncanny, unforeseen combinations and juxtapositions because it's all available. So in a way, it kind of like creates more individual or customization, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Because you can cherry pick. Your palette is so much bigger.
Yeah.
But it did seem like, I don't know, 15 years ago, it's like, okay, if you're a Red Wing guy, then you're wearing these LVCs, these selvage jeans. Yeah. It was like very kind of archetype. And now it's sort of like the archetypes have kind of blown up a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
It's one of the, I think maybe one of the few things that I really am grateful for with some of the social media stuff, especially just kind of seeing how other folks are mixing things up, with the, but you're right. Like there's just no more heritage stuff. And even earlier, I was seeing some of the photos from Milan and Paris. And even when I was out there, you saw like an old dude wearing these beautiful bespoke heavyweight wool pants and, like nice pair of like vintage boots, big heavy like Mackinac style or like the classic almost like shadow plaid Filson with the black and the gray. I mean, it all looks good. And I guess it was cold there, right? So it was chilly. Oh yeah, it's very chilly.
So what I was seeing from my colleagues who were over there who were sending me photos, I mean, there was like a lot of Filson-esque or Filson clothes, a lot of Packer coats, a lot of Mackinac wool coats, more so than ever. But that's also the climate, right? It's cold, it's winter, it works. But I think there's also something about just the point in time. It seems like there's a lot of heat and interest around having those pieces for people who take dressing seriously.
Yeah, I think we should chat a little bit about that in terms of like dressing seriously, because I think one of the things I've liked a lot as I've like gotten into stuff is you'll get into a brand that maybe they're kind of reinterpreting some of the, I don't know, like a Mackinac, right? Or whatever. But if you really start to get into like fashion, or more, at least for me, like learning more about how you want to dress for yourself and how you want to dress for the rest of the world, it's very difficult to just be satisfied with that one interpretation, in the sense that like, there's such an advantage you all have because you all started it. You want to find out like, like if you're into a band and you listen to some cover song, you're like, yeah, but I want to hear the original Dylan version. Can we hear that? Can we hear the original recording, please? Can we get into, and I feel like that you will always kind of make your way. Yes, you're right. A lot of people are wearing heavyweight wool chore coats, but it's hard to get into that and not want to double down and get like the original.
Sure. That's a good analogy.
Yeah. I mean, it's where
the music piece.
Oh yeah.
And the covers, right?
Yeah.
I certainly do the same thing. I want to go back to the source and hear the original.
Yeah.
Landslide by Fleetwood Mac is, it's like, you got to listen to that. You can't just listen to the Smashing Pumpkins version.
That's right? True. Love Billy Corgan. I love you, bro. But give me Stevie.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump back, because I think one of the things that always fascinates me is that you started off doing furniture repair.
Long time ago.
Yeah. But I feel like for folks that are you have such a wide range of design, but it's extremely focused in the sense that like there's outdoor stuff, but it's always, your career sort of looks very seamless in the sense that like you haven't ventured into these brands that are so wildly outlandish from your core. And I feel like so much of that stuff tends to run in common with people who have an understanding of like home and home design. So I'm curious like how you found your way into the furniture world.
I've always liked history. I've always resonated with space. I've always been somebody who is sensitive to my surroundings.
Right.
And, I think growing up in New England, there was just a lot of history around in stuff, right? So stuff, places, buildings, cemeteries, boatyards, layers and layers of history, objects, origin stories. So, I think that I always liked the stories that objects told, where they took me. And I've always liked working with my hands. Like I thought maybe I would be better at landscaping than I would be at doing what I do now. Like I really like to work physically. I think, when I got out of school, I started working at a small workshop outside of Boston. And the guy who owned the place would restore a lot of antiques, regional antiques, but also build replicas.
Nice.
So that was very interesting. So I kind of became a master of copying in furniture production, even down to finishes, patinas. Somebody would bring in an antique set of, early American Windsor chairs and would want a fourth, and then we would create the fourth and it would look seamless, right? So, and I don't know. I always liked stuff. And I remember as a kid too, we'd go to Plymouth Plantation or Colonial Williamsburg, and I would try to kind of recreate those environments in my own space back at home as a little kid. So yeah, I don't know. Again, it was like always a connection to history. And I liked, the irregularities of handmade things. And, it kind of started where, I just had a knack for creating spaces.
Right.
And the furniture building that I was doing, one of our clients was somebody who worked at Ralph Lauren, and a guy named Donald Nowicki. And at the time, my mentors were saying, hey, Alex, I was living in Boston. You should really go to New York to expand your skill set. Go work for Aero Studio or go work for Munder Skiles, or, find your way, find a path forward so that you don't just have to live off of ramen noodles in this workshop. And it was really crazy. I was completely broke. I would take the train from Beacon Hill to Brookline, and my first apartment on Beacon Hill was a basement apartment that literally had dirt floors. It was crazy. It was pretty nuts. And long story short, I started poking around in the city in New York, thinking about, and I was hungry, and I wanted to get more experiences under my belt. And one of the clients we had said, hey, there's a job at Ralph Lauren in visual merchandising, coming from where you are, that could be an interesting fit. And I was a little bit naive. I saw it as a means to an end. Like, oh, okay, this could be an interesting segue. I'll get into New York and then I'll end up working somewhere. I don't know. I'll meet somebody and they'll take me to the Hudson Valley and I'll build shaker chairs in the Hudson Valley. I didn't really know what I was doing.
You and Helmut Lang. Yeah, I get it.
So, and it was interesting. I remember, my first day, it was summertime in the 90s, early 90s, going to my first job on Madison Avenue. And it was just such a different world from where I came. And I remember I had an old, shitty hand-me-down Paul Stewart blazer with the lining missing. It was like an ugly kind of pea green. It was too big. And I had a pair of loafers that were probably, again, hand-me-downs, half a size too big, beat up little penny loafers. And I remember walking into my job for the first day, and there's a dude with a sarong, and, his incredible hair and just glowing. And, and I just came from a wood shop, by way of Nantucket with an ill-fitting blazer. Yeah. But it was really cool. It was really great, sort of finding myself within a pod of people who had a language that was very natural for me. And I kind of felt like, oh, okay, now I'm with the people that I'm supposed to be. Now I feel like it fits and it works and it makes sense. And, it was an incredible few years there. And, folks like Mary Randolph Carter, definitely, I felt like a connection with the, sort of some of the cultural context and backgrounds and this whole idea of Americana. It was something that I myself experienced and lived and felt like, okay, now there's a posse that all hangs out together that resonates that way, that sort of shares that language and shares those references. And whether it's Doug Billmeyer or, Mary Randolph Carter, it's like we all have our little, our sort of lives outside of New York that are about our regions where we came from and, beauty and history and art and culture and all of that. And so it was great. It was great as a professional,
Yeah.
really learning the ropes, learning about brand through osmosis in the most basic way. Of course, a lot of people talk about the school of Ralph, but I think for me, I had my schooling before Ralph, but it's sort of that's where it started to gel and became palpable and provided me a sense of context for my education.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And then, I flipped over into store design.
Oh, geez.
And that was interesting. Actually, working on freestanding stores.
Yeah.
Having a hand in, the San Francisco store and building, doing some design work there and going to markets around the world and buying things for stores. And
what was one of the
vendors.
craziest things you bought? I mean, I remember the people buying an entire train station's timetable. Had to bring it on an 18-wheeler.
The craziest thing was it was not store development related. It was a show. It was so I was doing merchandising, visual merchandising on the home collection floor at the Rhinelander Mansion.
Okay.
And I was responsible for helping to bring to life the Belgravia home collection. And within the concept of the floor plan, there was a library.
Mm-hmm.
So we built all these shelves, right? It was a room of shelving. Beautiful, Faro and Ball, navy blue painted bookcases. And I went down to the Strand with sort of a no budget, buy all the books to fill the shelves. And of course I have a lot of, and this was like an amazing thing. I love books, right? And I have a very, specific point of view on like books and books that I like to read and books that I would envision in this library, in Belgravia. So it's everything from like Evelyn Waugh to, Shakespeare and Thomas Hardy. So I'm like at the Strand, just filling up boxes and boxes and boxes. First editions, old books, beautiful spines, filling it all there, having it all brought up to Madison Avenue. Well, at the end of the day, it's 7 p.m. or something, 9 p.m. I go home. The other guys that worked in visual merchandising and the display guys, they're going to kind of take it over from there. And the shelves were, mistakenly not deep enough.
Uh-oh.
So I come in the next day and there's a bandsaw and all the books were cut in half. And it was my fault, essentially. It was like, I was part of the problem, but also the solution because they just hot glued all these books in there. And that was pretty crazy. I mean, that was expensive and, that stands out as a remarkable example of a bunch of stuff that I purchased that kind of has a weird twist to it.
Fits in the dream. I get it.
But like Paris flea markets and Brimfield, we'd go to Brimfield. I think I bought a giant marlin or a nurse shark taxidermy for the East Hampton store or something like that. So and that was fun. I mean, that was really fun going to the markets. And there too, you would like meet your people. And I still have friends to this day that I just met who were vendors or other people shopping, and you would like compete with the folks from Martha Stewart. But it was a good time. But, I think all of that, I realized, the clothing is king. All of this is for the clothes.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to learn about clothes. I really wanted to get into the meat of the conversation and I was handy. I was a handy guy. So even, out of my little, apartment on the Upper East Side, my 5th floor walk up, I had a sewing machine and I would, hem things and I would make things. And so I was good at that. I knew how to deconstruct clothing. I knew how to put it back together. I made no money. So a lot of things were DIY and, working in the home team too. Like I would get fabrics and I would, make a necktie out of a scrap of fabric or make a belt or patch things. And so it was very natural for me when there was an opportunity to work directly with clothes. But I had to leave Ralph in order to find my path into clothing. And I went to Abercrombie and Fitch. I was recruited to go work there for a couple of years in men's concepts. which was a really great way. If you did not have a formal apparel background, it was a really great way to kind of survey the business, be able to understand the role of design, product development, and concept is great because it's just research, and then using the research to articulate, put it together, and create presentations based on what you're seeing. So it's like input, output. And it was very, I think at the time, Chuck Martin was the guy who was the VP of men's there. He kind of headed up the whole thing with Mike Jeffries and those guys. And Chuck was head of design, and he was very also open to, he wanted authenticity. He wanted Americana. So there was a ton of vintage research. I'd go to John Glucko's from Strong Arm back in the day on the Lower East Side and just, come back with stacks of flannels and, go to vintage markets and put it all together. But even, I would take trips to the Coast Guard Academy and go through their archives in New London, Connecticut, or went up to, just going up the Hudson to old antique barns and people who sold clothes and, and just pulling it all together while also going to Ron Herman and Fred Siegel and, seeing what was happening in the world. And again, putting it all to purpose, going back to the office, building storyboards. So, the concept role was fantastic because you would influence. It was more like influence, don't control. You would influence and you'd feed the designers.
Oh,
and you're not
interesting.
and it wasn't, you're not beholden to one category. It's head to toe. It's print, pattern, colors, silhouettes, shapes, fabrics, materials, and very much like an in-house trend service. So you're going to vacation spots. You're coming back and saying baggy swimwear. Sort of overall sort of creative direction on the product. And the more I would get into it, the more you understand it technically, the better you're able to sort of communicate and convey ideas. And, that was really interesting. And I remember I was there one time, I think it was end of the summer, and I'd put together a presentation, and a lot of it was about, active lifestyle outdoors. And I felt anything but active and so disconnected from the outdoors. And I felt like I'm doing all this storytelling, but I feel pretty disconnected from the
end user
stories. The stories that I'm advocating.
Right. Yeah.
And, and I had a moment where I thought, you know what, this isn't taking me in the direction that I want to go. I would like to live it. I'd like to get my hands dirty. I want to go back to New England. I want a boat. I want a dog. I want to build bonfires. I want to go apple picking. I want to make things with my hands. I want to kind of try that again.
Right.
So I left New York and went up to Maine pretty much, with a sense of, jump and the net will appear.
Oh,
but I just had a real need to get back to my roots a little bit and just reflect and alter course. And so I did a number of, small things while I was up in Maine and, becoming a furniture builder again, that didn't really pay the bills.
No.
And then I was at a fundraiser for the Nature Conservancy where I was doing some volunteer work.
Okay.
And I met the Gormans of LL Bean. And they were there, active participants. Lisa Gorman was really involved with the Nature Conservancy. Pretty interesting crew. I just started meeting interesting folks up in Maine. And then Lisa introduced me to her husband, and he was, good enough to say, hey, why don't you meet some more people at LL Bean, especially given who you are and where you came from.
Yeah.
And that then evolved into working at Bean. And they created a job that was pretty unconventional. They created a role that was like internal design consultant, like a corporate design consultant that was internal. But I was roving and I would move through different businesses, different SBUs,
Yeah.
So I would do some merchandising for the flagship store before 4th of July. I would work on a home project. I would work on a kids pants project and, did LL Bean Kids. And that got pretty tactical. And next thing I knew, I was going to South America and Asia and going to factories and help manage the kids business for a while. Was involved closely with sourcing, manufacturing, and wanted to get involved in menswear. So moved from being a product line manager in kids over to men's, worked on a couple different categories in men's. Again, very connected to sourcing, product development, manufacturing, going to factories. It was incredible how efficient it was working in factories overseas and getting things done, and how quickly you could turn things around and see samples and also learn about their capabilities. And, I was living in Maine, and I would come home in the evenings and long winter nights. And I was, a young guy with a lot of energy. And, there are only so many Stephen King books you can get through, and I just started, I kind of turned my kitchen and garage into a workshop, started screen printing, started making things on my own.
And this is Rogues, huh?
That was the Rogues Gallery project that I did for a few years.
Wait a second. I got to get my bids in on the Bezel app, but more on that in a minute. I get all sorts of emails and questions from you all, which I love to read and respond. And one thing I constantly get, and even read in the Blamo Slack, is what watch should I buy and where should I get it? It's a wild world out there with all sorts of websites and shops, but I go to Bezel. Bezel is the trusted marketplace for buying and selling your next luxury watch, with expert in-house authentication on every purchase. First off, folks, it's getbezel.com. That's getbezel.com. But I use and recommend Bezel because it's the best of both worlds. You can go to the site and browse a marketplace of luxury watches, over 16,000 of them, by the way, which is a lot. And I know that Bezel is going to authenticate your purchase. Or you can create an account and get connected with your own private client advisor, called the concierge. Because look, making a watch purchase can be confusing, especially when you don't know all the reference numbers. When was this made? Did they use ceramic then? Is it a triple lop, dingle dop? What the heck? I don't even know. But they do at Bezel, and they're here to help. Concierge, baby. Look, if looking for your watch to mark a special occasion, or maybe you're just doing research, right? They even have their own journal where you can learn all the ins and outs about Bezel and the brands and all the stuff that's happening right now. But back to my bids. Yes, Bezel now has auctions, and not just any auctions. They got Rolex, they got Cartier, they got Audemars Piguet, all the big dogs and more. So you can discover, bid, and know the Bezel team has got your back with verified in-house authentication. So visit getbezel.com on your smartphone or computer. Bezel, the trusted marketplace for buying or selling your next luxury watch.
And I remember my boss at LL Bean at the time, the guy who was the head of men's, I told him about it. I showed him what I was doing, what I was working on. And he said, yeah, you have to go. I got an order from Barney's, New York. So sort of a friend saw the thing that I was doing at home. I got this crazy PO from Barney's, and talked to my boss about it, and he said, yeah, you're always welcome to come back, but you need to, see what's up with this and follow through with it.
Wow.
And that was really great. And that was really great, really rewarding. I had no idea what I was doing, sort of running a business, hiring people, setting up shop in a warehouse. We had 2 retail stores. We had a showroom in New York. That's where I met Aaron. I think I'd met Aaron Levine.
Yeah, because he was at Hickey,
He was at Hickey, and then Aaron helped me for a little while. And it was fantastic. But again, I didn't have my forte was not logistics and operations.
Yeah.
And
you didn't have your Duffy there, I guess.
Yes, correct. And so, I took on a couple partners in a very, a unconventional way through one of the factories we were working with based in Europe. The guy who owned the factory wanted to get involved in the business. I brought him in. logistically, it was very challenging with him being based overseas and me being in Maine. And then around 2008, a lot of businesses got hit hard.
Yeah, the recession.
And, we grew too fast. And I was ready to try something else. I'd been doing my own thing with Rogues Gallery for a number of years, and I went back to LL Bean as a consultant to help kick off an SBU for them.
Because this was Signature, right?
That was Signature, yeah.
Which was, I'll just say, like, Signature for me, I think brought so many new people who were looking for, the fisherman sweater and the Norwegian sweater and the duck boot and all these other things. And because I feel like that, the theme that runs throughout like your life and career is, I feel like you're this guy who's up in an attic and everyone's below and they want to be, and they don't totally get it. And you're the person who's like, yeah, by the way, do you remember this? Do you remember how good this is? And all of us down here are like wandering aimlessly, looking for treasures and never looking up, and I feel like, from Filson and LL Bean and Ralph and all these things, like it's so interesting to me because as a designer and what you've created, it's this constant world building, I mean, I've had so many people on the show over the years where it's like, oh, I made this individual piece. And then I had to scale a brand on this single piece, this magic shoe, whatever it is. But like you're constantly building worlds and refining these worlds and making these like very fun and inviting places for people to be in, to where in a lot of ways, at least for me, you kind of just don't want to leave. You're like, well, I don't really need anything else. Like I have all these things here, And when you did Signature was huge because all of a sudden younger people, and I remember this because I was working at Beggar's Group and I was working with the guys from Vampire Weekend. And so Ezra and them, and I remember getting a bunch of LL Bean Signature and giving it to the dudes to wear at SNL that night. Huh. And I mean, and a lot of this, cool. And I'll say, this new exciting interest had a lot to do with, with what you were doing over at Signature, because you also kind of refined a lot of these very classic pieces and silhouettes to where I'm trying to buy a thing extra small. And now it's like, oh, I can get it medium, Yeah. I mean, not to belittle anything that you're doing, but just saying like, how you were kind of constantly refining there. But sorry, I won't speak for you.
Resurfacing.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
I think is really, and that's what's so great about Filson. Like right now, we're about to kick off fall 2026.
Okay.
And more now than ever, I'm going into the archive and I'm really looking at, all kinds of hidden gems that have been, that were produced in recent history in the 90s and the 80s. I mean, and I'm thinking a lot about, you talk about the thing, I'm looking at a lot of, a variety of silhouettes, a variety of shapes. How to create more choice, how to make it all more dynamic looking, right? So that it doesn't feel flat. It's not a sort of a one tune song. So, but I think resurfacing is something I love to do, and I think about it in terms of what's core versus believable versus outlier. And that holds true for anything we do, whether it's photography or collaborations or product design and development. It's like, is this a core idea? Is this sort of believable coming from Filson, or is this a real outlier? Test and learn. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that anthropology is really important, and context and history, and I can't look at a shirt without imagining people, place, thing, where is it living, who's living in it. And that's true that's always been sort of the case, is it's this sort of way that my imagination or my brain works, where everything has context. It's never just sort of in a vacuum. And there's a bit of it's almost like storyboarding for a television show or a movie.
Right.
It's a process thing, I guess, right? So it's about process. How will it all come together? What is the end use? And I think that's what's so great about Filson is that, more than, many companies, Filson is so dedicated to use
and the
and
outdoors
function and utility. And,
yeah.
Is this something that you anticipate will live in the workshop? Will it live on the stream, in the snow? Will it keep you warm? And in developing those stories, sometimes we even have the opportunity to field test them before they go to market. So I'll be on a photo shoot, taking photos of the thing that was intended for very cold weather. And it will indeed be 50 below zero, and there are muskox. And you can legitimately come home and say, yes, this kept me warm. The merino wool base layers, the Mackinaw wool bibs, and the down, Wilton parka over it works perfectly well if you're snowmobiling in Kotzebue in the Arctic during winter,
Yeah.
or in March. So, end use is really important. And again, it's never, making something in isolation. It's imagining, who is this intended for? What's the overall end use? So that's helpful. And then again, the history piece is fantastic. I mean, even to the point where, Filson has very old roots. It's a 128-year-old company. And I imagine, or, I've done a lot of research on this region, in Edwardian, 19th century Seattle. And it is a crazy place. And there's so much great photo documentation with Ashel Curtis, Edward Curtis's brother, who, Edward Curtis is famously known for all of his portraits.
Mm-hmm.
His brother Ashel was a scenic landscape photographer. So there's great documentary of the Northwest through Ashel Curtis's lens. And then my favorite is Darius Kinsey. And up in Bellingham, an hour and a half or so north of Seattle, there's the Whatcom Museum, and they have this incredible archive of Kinsey photography, which documented all of the growth and the forestry industry in the Northwest.
Mm.
And, they're all black and white photographs. So you kind of have to imagine what was the actual color palette. And, we've created color palettes based on black and white photography. We've created silhouette, we've created styles. We've looked at, all inspired again by the history of Filson. So everything has a starting point. Everything is a dotted line. And then, I used to joke and say, we were like the original outfitter for, the Jack London stories, which is true, So anytime you imagine, Seattle is this portal, that takes you into the North, into the Klondike and the Yukon.
Yeah.
It's like, if you want to understand where those products lived, just read White Fang. Or Call of the Wild. Like there it is. There's the script for it, and we do the costume for the movie. So it's sort of that connection, which is very interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, how do you feel? Like how do you design for a brand that it feels like people don't want to change? In the sense that, like, for me as a customer, I bought Filson for well over 10 years. I mean, I still have the duffel that I travel with. That's at least 15 plus years old, but in a lot of ways, it's almost like my nostalgia. Like I almost don't want it to change. And so I'm curious as a designer, like, how do you kind of push and evolve?
Yeah. Well, I think, function is that's a really great filter. So function, utility, quality, the ethos of less is more, the analog approach, even with fit, every fitting, people know that these are clothes that you can move in.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't, I don't know, like if you can't do X, Y, or Z in this, if you're restricted,
right.
So it inherently, there's a de facto fit ethos that comes through the end use, and you maintain it. And, it's the idea that, yeah, sure, you can wear the button down to your office in Philadelphia, but you can also do X, Y, and Z with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of that interesting toggle. So if it looks like a loose fit shirt, it's because it's intended for your movement and your ability to move and get things done. We talk about engineered naivete sometimes.
Yeah.
That there needs to be a simplicity, that there's a ethos, a design language, which is simple. If it becomes overly complicated then it probably doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I agree.
And I like that. I like those guidelines, right? There have been even hot debates. People have said, "Hey, why not build a bag that has special pockets for all of your gadgets?"
No, please
And
don't.
it's like, yeah, but it's like, suspension of disbelief, right?
Yeah, okay.
So, your Filson OG briefcase that, you're wearing on, 57th Street in New York or to the office, could that also be used for, by a bush pilot who keeps his GPS and his, handgun in there? Could it also be used, by a crab fisherman, in the Bering Sea who's keeping his ship's journal in there? And yes, right. If it gets overly, if you put too many gadget pockets in there, it stops. You sort of break the toggle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. But I'm sure you've had a bit of tug of war in which maybe people around you have asked for some of these evolutions per se. And it's like, keeping a brand what it's the most loved and admired for, I think is also is a task worth to is a task that's you can celebrate. Like it's
Yeah, and I think it's it's pretty, without having a manual,
right,
without having there be a or like a sort of design standards pamphlet or user's guide. That you're in a pretty good spot if we say, all right, it's about it's about being basic, it's about fewer ingredients, it's about end use, it's about might as well have the best, or Filson's guarantees. So there's an inherent quality piece there. And again, it's this like quality, minimal, sort of this boxy analog fit that's really great for somebody who's physically active.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these sort of touch points, all of this criteria, sort of it produces the Filson look, if you will, or Filson style.
Right.
And that's where it's interesting today, where, you've got, not everyone who buys our stuff is a rancher in Montana or a bush pilot up in, Alaska.
Fair. Yeah.
So, we've been able to maintain a product DNA that's consistent and identifiable for folks anywhere, everywhere. And, we kind of stay there, and it's the right thing to do.
Right. Yeah. That being said, like, what are the things that you buy for yourself when you're getting dressed? I mean, from, like, what are personal favorites for you where you're just kind of like, yeah, I'm making this, but then you're making mental notes of like, I think I might allocate one of these for old Alex here.
So, again, it goes back to end use.
Okay.
So, and I should say that, most of my clothes are Filson.
Yeah.
Like it's very easy. It's very comfortable. I think even today I've got like Filson jeans on and Filson socks on. And so most of the clothing I own is Filson. Few brands make outerwear that compete with Filson outerwear. Our flannels are second to none. But again, end use, if I'm going to go skiing, I might need a couple things that we don't make. We don't have a sock that is tall enough for me for my ski boots.
Right.
Or we don't claim to outfit folks who are doing, offshore saltwater fishing. So, you might need some Grundens or deck boots so, there's that practical piece.
Mm-hmm.
Where, sometimes I'll, buy other brands depending upon the end use. And then I'm curious. And I also appreciate other folks' interpretation. I like creative people. I like creative interpretations of things. So as much as I talk about utility and am sort of geared for utility. I also love and appreciate, different expressions and different manifestations of shirts and coats and clothes. And, I really love it. So if I go to Mohawk General Store,
Great store.
they might have something that like, oh, wow, that's a really beautiful plaid, on an Orly wool shirt. Right. And it's 100% wool. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But it is, I'm in Los Angeles and it's 95 degrees and I can wear this wool Orly shirt with a pair of shorts, and it feels great and it's really beautiful. So, I can find things from lots of different places. Or like, we're not going to make a giant Donegal tweed overcoat that you might find at Anderson Shepherd.
Right.
And it's like, hello, you're in London. Come on. Yeah. You're going to, you're going to go to the pub. You're going to go to, get a piece of meat somewhere on a blustery evening. It's like, you might want that big Anderson Shepherd tweed coat that makes you feel like, I don't know, Anthony Hopkins from a Merchant of Ivory movie or something. Right.
Yeah. Oh, good callback. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Great. Yeah.
So I think, it just depends. I think place has to do with, there are a couple little shops, you were just at Pitti in Florence and you find, a wonderful little, like a thing that you might not you yourself might not consider doing, or it's not your thing, but it doesn't mean that you can't appreciate it. And I love that. I love sort of pulling it all together and, maybe I will buy a nice pair of loafers, right?
Sure.
And I'm not necessarily only wearing work boots because I work at Filson. There are times when, it's summertime and you want to go get some oysters and you're going to wear a rayon camp shirt and throw in some loafers and go sit outside somewhere and eat oysters. And that might not be the best, a pair of like, heavyweight whites logging boots don't make sense in that context. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, I thank you for that because I feel like that's really refreshing because I've talked to a lot of folks over the years where it's like, I like, a lot of your patrons or people who are buying Filson are probably not buying Filson for head to toe for every single thing. And so having such a wonderful understanding of like how the brand fits in to a new consumer, a new patron, a customer, whatever we want to call them, is so important. And I think where it's like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, maybe they bought a Mackinac and they're wearing it with like one of those super oversized Orally things. Or maybe they're, and I feel like the fact that that's acknowledged and also celebrated is so, so, so important versus, almost like disavowing that any of these things exist because it also goes to show how, confident I think you are in the brand in the sense that like, yeah, there are these things out there, but, it still fits. I mean, I digress, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, that's what's so fantastic about Filson, though, is that, I can go to Libby, Montana, and there are guys that are wearing Carhartts and Levi's and Red Wings, and they'll have a Filson Mackinac Cruiser or, a rugged twill bag and, with tools in it in the back of their F-350. Or you go to New York City and there's some dude wearing it with, ALD and Paraboot and...
Yeah, bingo.
And to me, that's where it's like, okay, now we are talking. Because this brand, this label has elevated, through time and interpretation and use, has elevated to this sort of global icon status.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like if there's this greatest hits of icons, the American, icons of sportswear encyclopedia. And, it's the 5-pocket jeans. It's the white t-shirt. It's the boat and tote. It's the duck boot. It's the Filson rugged twill luggage. It's the Filson tin cruiser, the Mackinac Cruiser, the AK guide shirt. These are things that all live in that, hall of American sportswear classics. So, and with that, a lot of different kinds of people can use it. It sees a lot of different interpretations. It's always relevant.
Yeah.
It doesn't trend out. And that's what's so great about working with a brand that is, truly, a true heritage brand that hasn't lost its way. If anything, it's become a little bit more codified and focused,
which is great,
and
yeah,
has a strong sense of identity. And I'd say, that's what allows for so much elasticity and interpretation.
Right. Yeah. I'm curious about this, like how, you've been in the industry for quite some time. Like, how do you feel that your own personal style has changed or evolved as you've gotten older? Like, are there things that you feel that now you'll let slide that maybe you used to obsess over, or vice versa? And it's like, are there some things now you just refuse to compromise on?
My own personal style has been remarkably consistent.
It has. I was looking at photos of you over the years, and I'm like, damn, this is going to be a tough question.
Yeah. No, it's even, like my house, and I remember, again, like going back to the early 90s, the Benjamin Moore paints that I used in my apartment are still my go-tos. I think my bedroom ceiling color in Seattle is like the Navajo white Benjamin Moore color that was on my apartment wall on the Upper East Side back in 1990, in the 90s. So I tend to be very consistent about
very warm white. Good. Nice pick.
And I think because I understand the true cost of materials, because I'm sharper now in my, at this point in my career, I really know like the value and the true cost of things. I have a much higher bar for if I'm going to spend money on a thing.
Right.
So it's like that to me. It's like, okay, yes, I love that. A year ago, I was in Venice. I put on this J.W. Anderson, like kind of Popeye rugby sweater that looked like sort of a longshoreman sweater. It was like great. It was great. Like boiled wool, just this boxy, funky thing. And I was like, oh, this is really quirky. It's got a lot of character.
Yeah.
I just cannot get myself to spend this much money on this because I know what it really costs.
Sure.
And I could probably figure out how to just like make my own and do the thing in it. So, I think when I was younger, I definitely would explore. I'd get out of my lanes, I'd veer off a little bit and try a thing here, try a thing there. And now I think I just look at like, okay, I've become more sensible. So sometimes I'll compare to like, okay, the cost of that, like I'll look for it on eBay or I'll say, okay, in terms of clothing, you tend to wear the same thing all the time anyway. So even though I do like to shop and I do like to buy things and I do like to try things, maybe it's better to buy a first edition of this book instead of that sweater or coat or bag. And then there's a question of, that's also like the accumulation of time.
Yeah.
I think recently somebody in the store like pulled up a thing that showed me how much I've spent at Filson over the past 10 years.
Oh, why would you do that? No.
Yeah, it's like, dude, you never need another bag, like ever, right?
Well, but you might need another bag.
Yeah.
If you're me.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing too. It's like we do things here. We did a blanket, we made a blanket and then cut up the blanket and made a robe out of the blanket. And it is just so beautiful. And, I know where the wool is sourced and I know the small ancient mill where it was woven and washed in Italy and felted, and the colors and, the design is unique and the felt trim is like from Germany or something, it's like all of it coming together to create this sort of, pioneer era, Jeff Bridges from True Grit, it's like this amazing thing that you cannot get anywhere else. And then, I'm going to buy the robe and it's, it's a lot of money, but it's very beautiful and it tells a story and I have a connection with it,
I have a trunk back there that's behind this chair and it's filled with old fabrics, like 2-3 meters, to make a jacket or to make something. And I don't think I've used any of those fabrics in probably a decade because in my head, I'm like, well, I don't know should I make a jacket with this one fabric, and it's not even like I want it to age or anything like that, but it's like, it's still so special to me that I'm like, well, and a friend of mine was like, well, you've made all these jackets over the years. He's like, are you ever going to use this fabric? And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe someday.
Same. I found a giant piece of fabric, from like one of these old school houses at a secondhand store in London, like Brunswick and Fee, someone like that. And it had such a cool motif on it of Arctic fishing lures. I mean, so specific. It's like this dark brick color with these like repeat of fishing lures for like Arctic fishing.
Yeah.
And it's the most amazing thing. I have this like a little study with this armchair that needs to be repolstered. And I keep thinking about it. But then it's like, well, if I do that, then I can't use it for, what if I find something else that I want to upholster the thing in? So it's been sitting there for 5 years or 6 years. Just the two are side by side, but I can't get myself to do that because what if I find a better chair for the thing? Because I love the fabric so much. So there's a lot of that in my world. So, I just start accumulating. And then it's like a library where it's like, okay, these are all just like unused fabrics. These are like, chair frames that need to be redone. Or I'll keep things because, I found a, what do you call it? Like a settee that is a American Victorian Western sort of walnut settee, dark, scrolled, looks like it came off the set of Deadwood, and with a tufted leather upholstered, all original. And there's nowhere it fits in my house, but I have it kind of downstairs, like in front of a fireplace. And I just keep it there because I'm envisioning the perfect photo shoot where I'm imagining, like that portrait, the tintype that I want to take on that sofa, on that settee, and it's just sitting there and it's in the way and it's a pain in my ass. And I can't get myself to sell it or move it until I take that iconic Filson shot of, or it's like, whoever, Robert Eggers wants to remake Call of the Wild and I get to do the props for it, and it's like that perfect chair that is needed for that, remake of Call of the Wild starring Anthony Hopkins, or like that thing. So I do that a lot with stuff.
Yeah.
And I think, some people really are critical of it, and there's the H word, but I can't bring myself to like, just put it in storage. It needs to be accessible. And, and that kind of goes back to the beginning of the conversation where like it starts with things and the stories that things tell, the old wooden floors, in my house that I grew up in, on Cape Cod where, they're older than the Constitution, and they're just so gnarly and dark and weathered and they just look like, black skin. But they're like almost 300 years old. And, you can only imagine all the conversations and the people and the births and the deaths and the connectivity.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of old things like that in my, we when we moved here, we were in Brooklyn initially, and I was like, oh, great. Now there's a place for all this stuff. And as you can see, behind me, I mean, my wife's got stuff, I got stuff. And there was a few times where she was like, hey, I know you have some old suits or you have some other things. I have a lot of old American Indian blankets. My grandma was an American Indian, grew up on a res and all this stuff. And so I have a lot of things from her that we inherited, from like squash blossom necklaces, all that stuff.
Wow.
And my wife's like, we should just, get rid of this. And I'm like, no, I'm like, these are one, like apart from family history, because there's a lot of things that aren't, I'll be honest. And I'm like, these are my baseball cards. Like this is my life. And she's like, well, baseball cards are small and they all fit in like a little box. She's like, not, multiple rooms. And I'm like, we can't get rid of it. I'm like, who am I without my stuff? I'm just screaming Rosebud. Like
totally. I always see like what the thing could become,
Smart.
And I know too, like, folks in the office get annoyed with me because I don't want to throw anything away.
Fair.
Right. Even if it's like, well, that could be a reference for that. That could be a reference for that. And I know how much things cost. I know what, used flannel shirts on eBay cost. And so they'll say, well, we used that last season. You referenced that old shirt you already used it. Well, I did, but we didn't recolor it, right? Or we didn't enlarge it 200%. Or we did it. We used it as a reference for a flannel shirt, but now imagine you enlarge it 200%, and now let's do it in 24-ounce wool and change the color. So it's like that's the problem, is that everything is sort of a conduit for something else.
Yeah.
And I like being able to have things that are tangible and then juxtapose them, where you say, okay, well, imagine if you take the canvas collar off of that shirt and put it on that canvas work shirt, and now it looks like our field coat if you do it in these colors. And there's a lot of that where it's sort of recycling, repurposing, juxtaposing, shifting, taking disparate things, putting them together to create something new.
Right.
And that's I guess also just a process piece.
Yeah. Well, as we start to wrap, you've already mentioned some incredible, some films, some books, but I am curious, if someone was like, hey, they're making the Alex Carleton movie, or they're setting the wing of whatever building. What are some of the records that are being played, or the films that are on, or the movie, or the books that you feel like, maybe tell a bit more about you?
That's a tough one. I like, Thoreau and, American nature writing. And I like, one of my favorite authors is Charles Dickens.
Yeah. What's your favorite Dickens?
I've never finished Bleak House. As a base, Bleak House is great.
Yeah.
As a baseline, the best sort of morality tale, just A Christmas Carol, is fantastic. It holds up. Yeah. And it's not a Christmas story. It's just, and I think about it at least 5 times a week. I always think about Ghost of Christmas Future and the choices that we have to make. Right. So decision making I love it as just sort of a compass for decision making and how we think about the future and different outcomes. So, art is pretty easy for me. I like a lot of traditional art, from Audubon to, Wyeth, obviously. And, I think it would be great to do some Jack London remakes. I think that could be really fantastic as a starting point. Interpretations of music. I am all over the place, from classic music, classical, from Mozart and Beethoven, on a Sunday morning, puttering around the house if I need to unwind or relax. I like, I have tickets to go see Colter Wall tonight at the Paramount here in Seattle. So, I'm pretty all over the place. It depends on mood. It depends on what the context is. I have a playlist for New Mexico. I have a playlist for Montana.
Really?
It depends, really.
Yeah, I've never thought of that, because there's a lot of cities that I'll visit frequently, and I have like a accidental playlist, because there are a few places where I'm like, oh, I'm in New York, I like listening to this record, this Simon and Garfunkel thing, or this Interpol or whatever.
Totally. Like I probably would only listen to Morrissey and the Smiths and like Haircut 100 if I'm like in London going to get beans and eggs somewhere. It's in the taxi. So
fair.
It kind of depends on where I am, what I'm doing. I have a September sort of vibe, or I have an October playlist. My October playlist is definitely more hardcore, Deftones, So
Be Quiet and Drive. You get in the F-150 or whatever, and it's just yeah. Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time. I want to be really conscious of. I know you got a lot of other stuff happening. It meant a lot that you came on the show.
It was really great to chat with you. I feel like I made a friend, Jeremy.
Yes, likewise.
I hope we end up in the same place physically at one point, can have a drink together, and
I'd love that.
Keep the conversation going.
I'll hit you up, but thank you so much.
You bet.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. I'll see you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to Blamo. Our show is produced by Blamo Media. We're edited by Amar Lowell, and our theme music, as always, by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. If you like what you heard, you know the drill. Share the pod with a friend. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Give us 5 stars or thumbs up on whatever other thing you're listening to us on, whether it's Dingledorp or Bing Bong, whatever it's called. But you can also follow us on Instagram for all the hot content. If you want to talk to us and give us your hot take, we'd love to hear from you. You can send us an email at info@blamopod.com. Last but not least, super ultra important, if I had a air horn, I would press it right now. You got to come and join us over on Patreon, because the fun never stops over there. Look, the live show, the free show, whatever you want to call this, we take breaks here and there, but Patreon, it never stops. And we also got exclusive shows like Die Workwear, hosted by Derek Guy and Peter Zotolo, and the Triple J Show, hosted by yours truly with John Moy and Gene DeLeon. There's just a ton of stuff over there. So check it out at patreon.com/Blamo. If not, no worries. We got hundreds and hundreds of free episodes in the feed and more to come. So we will see you all soon.